Welcome to Sacred Stories, where together, through the power of our stories, we journey into our shared consciousness. I am your host, Reverend Patricia Brooks, and today I am delighted to speak with minister, scholar, actor, community activist, and soon-to-be best-selling author, Reverend Dr. Jane Galloway. Welcome, Jane, to Sacred Stories.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited. Full disclosure, I'm interviewing Jane because her soon-to-be released book, The Gateways, The Wisdom of 12-Step Spirituality, is being published by Sacred Stories Publishing, one of my companies. And this is a interview to dig into who Jane is, what The Gateways is about, and why it's such an incredible and important piece of work. So, Jane, let's start with, who is Jane Galloway? Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
You know, you kind of sent me something about this earlier, and I love that you told me that you were going to ask that question because I got to really think about it. And I would say that the answer to who Jane Galloway is that I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher, I'm an old soul, and as my dad used to say, I have moxie, which I guess is like a highly caffeinated soft drink from the 30s. I never quite knew what that was all about, but, you know, I have guts, I have courage, but at my essence, I'm a teacher, and I have been since I was a kid. I love translating ideas for people and helping people understand things. That's really who I am.
You know, first of all, I love that you say you're a teacher, and I had visions of you when you were talking about that as a young child playing school. I used to play school as a child, and I'm just...
I can see that.
I was always a teacher. I was always a teacher when I played school with my friends. That's so funny. And I never knew what moxie, the real origins of the word moxie. So right off the bat, you've taught me something, and I'm sure many of our listeners. Yeah, that's awesome. So I say you're the author of the brand new and soon-to-be best-selling book, The Gateways, and I say that with full conviction because I've read your book and I really do know what an incredibly important piece of work this is. And I think of it as a gift in service to to humanity, really, and to the healing of this world.
I've got to say I agree with you. I think this has been an unbelievably humbling and clarifying experience for me writing this book. And part of that has been about the fact that I've been working on these concepts, living these concepts, teaching them, explaining them, understanding them, drawing pictures about them for years, and I mean over 30 years. But I didn't have the whole thing put together. And you know, the reason I finally sat down to write is that a very smart friend who was also on my ministry team in my New York spiritual community said to me, look, you can teach so many things, but what we want to know is what works for you. And I immediately said, oh, well, that's easy. It's the 12 steps and all this other stuff that I have ended up learning about how they work and et cetera. And she said, write that. So, of course, that's easier said than done. But as I began to write it, I realized that there was an inherent order inside of me that understood how it was supposed to be taught. And I really have had the experience. And I've been writing this, but I wrote the book for 4 years. But the last 2 years, I mean, intensely wrote it so much that I have a whole new level of relationship with my chiropractor. You know, I mean, I just never got up from that chair. But I really began to understand the concept of being at the service of the work, because I had to get myself in that chair and I had to do what I internally understood was the order of what was trying to come forth. But I wasn't writing it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start with the title. The title is called The Gateways. That's such a fascinating title. Tell me how you came to name your book, The Gateways.
You know, I had been listening to someone whose work I love, Dr. Mario Martinez, and he talks about the different, he doesn't call them gateways. It's a totally other thing. And honestly, I'm actually forgetting as I'm talking what he does call these different life stages. But he really works on longevity and studies centenarians, healthy centenarians, and the thought patterns that go into really staying alive as long as you're living, if you will. And he talks about these cultural kind of, the way I viewed them was almost like a lock in a large body of water, like the Panama Canal or something. You come up with the boat and then you go through at another level, and then you come up again at the boat and you come through at another level. So I was listening to him talk about his concepts, and he really talks about how these different cultural moments come at us, and we have to really have our own deep understanding of how we confront those ideas. He talks a lot about ageism and various things, wonderful stuff. But so I loved his idea of that. And as I began to write this, I realized that's really, I want to explain how these 12 steps and the related energetic spiritual practices that go with each different level of the growth that is part of the 12-step process, how they grow and build upon one another and really open into a whole brand new vista, really. And so it seemed to me, and I went around and around with this title. It wasn't like an easy, that's the title. And I talked to numerous people about it and really tried to kind of process through what it was. But what I got to was this, that it really is about an opening. It is about ushering ourselves into an opening, into a new, really, layer of consciousness. And so, and I got help from people in terms of getting feedback from them. You think it should be called this, you should think it should be called that. The gateways seems to be the best description of how I see each one of these steps building upon the other, to open us into a whole new world. Also, there's a great quote from the AA Big Book, which, really to me says it. I mean, they said it in the original literature. People began to try to make God or their version of God a lot smaller than this almost immediately. But the founders of AA said, to us, the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. So I wanted to open people onto that big open highway, if you will. So that's really how the gateways came to be. And then I really looked at a lot of graphics to see what looked like kind of coming through this tunnel, a tunnel of becoming, almost the birth canal in a way, and coming into this bright sunshine, which is really how I have experienced the spiritual path of the 12 steps.
I'm so glad you mentioned AA, because we mentioned the 12 steps right off the bat, but not everyone may be familiar when we use the terminology, the 12 steps. We're referring to AA or, addiction recovery, the support group. And,
right.
and I think it's really important that we speak to that just for a moment. So the gateways, if you were to tell people, I wrote this book, The Gateways, The Wisdom of 12-Step Spirituality. You've explained so much so beautifully so far, but what would you say is kind of the heart of the nugget, the 30-second, elevator speech and what the Gateways is?
I would say that the 12-step programs, beginning with AA and then growing out from AA, are a spiritual path. And the founders wrote their experience and were able to say in step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understand God, praying only for God's will for us and the power to carry that out. And then 5 seconds later comes the next step, which says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. So there's no how-to and there's no path for really living an expanded life at step 11, doing that step 11 work. It used to be, and my father, I talk about this in the book, my father was in AA and in the olden days, And, I mean, he loved the program. He was very charismatic and spoke all over and stuff. But those guys really, truly were just so happy to die sober. I mean, he had a great life sober. But, you know, they didn't get sober in their 20s like I did. Or some people, I met somebody the other day who's 19 who's just gotten sober. So how many years could they have used drugs, you know? So they have a whole lifetime to grow. So there's like there's a missing link between step 11 and step 12. And I've thought about this sometimes really almost like a trap door at step 11 that opens people into this deeper world of spiritual explanation toward this broad, roomy, inclusive highway. Because, you know, so that's one way I would describe it, is that this is an expanded, deepening version of step 11, not proscriptive, but suggestive. And, you know, the literature in AA says this book is meant to be suggestive only. That's one of the things I love about the 12-step program, is that it's not, nobody's telling you what you have to do. Unfortunately, human beings want to create fundamentalist rules, and you have to do it this way and you have to do it that way. So almost immediately after this broad, roomy, wonderful highway of spirituality began, people started imposing all of these rules and how you have to be with a sponsor and stuff. If you look at the original material, it's just not even in there. This is all folklore, and it's all people wanting rules. So a lot of people defaulted to their familiar zone, which was, in many cases, a rather conservative Christianity, which had kind of a punitive angle to it, a bit of a shame-based orientation, and very definitely a patriarchal slant. And so some of the folklore and the culture of the 12-step programs over the years has developed, you go into some of these meetings in, you know, I've traveled all over the world actually and gone to meetings all over the world, but some certain states I've attended meetings and I would think I was in a fundamentalist revival. That's not AA. So that's fine, that's their AA. But over the years, working with many, many women and many people who are not part of that norm that was this kind of, heterosexual male model of we got sober and thank God, and I'm a stockbroker and he's a doctor, and come on, guys, we're all going to get sober. But people who are outside that norm, of whom there are so many, need some help with the spiritual potential and possibilities that are present within working this program. A lot of people, and I see it all the time, people get to a certain point, they love the nurturing and the encouragement of the early stages of sobriety. They get to the point of trying to lead a spiritual life. They can't find a place where they really plug in, and they end up relapsing. In some cases, relapsing so they can come back as newcomers and repeat the early steps over again. That's not good. So a lot of what I really want to create for people is, wow, yes, this really, I get it. This really gives a greater dimension to what these, I believe, channeled steps are talking about. I began drawing diagrams years ago of the 12 steps and then principles, writing principles next to each one, that I thought related to the basic issue that was dealt with in that step. And then I was drawing all these systems I was learning and exploring, the Kabbalah Tree of Life, the Chinese meridian system, and I studied shiatsu, Ohashi method of shiatsu for a number of years. The meridian system, those are the ancient wisdom kind of systems, but then also more human potential psychology. Abraham Maslow, Erikson, 8 Ages of Man. Abraham Maslow was one of the first people who said, wait a minute, you're studying abnormal psychology. What you're looking at, what happens in very, very, very sick people. And then you're developing a whole psychological format and prescription for all of humankind and calling that psychology. He said, let's study people who are high achievers, people who overcome huge boundaries and barriers. Let's study them and see what they have in common. So he looked at this hierarchy of needs and how we have to meet certain basic needs first for clothing and shelter and food, et cetera, and, then building up to the higher levels of enlightenment. So as I began looking at this, I thought, wait a minute, this is like the 12 steps. So I saw that this was all a developmental model and that the 12 steps are an amazing practical delivery system for healing and transforming along this kind of grid or spine or ladder, if you will, that begins at the root chakra with, I got to figure out who I am, and I've got to get my basics together, and then moving on up through the body. So this is, you said briefly. That's not a good brief description. But I think basically what I see in this is that it's a developmental model. It's a developmental model for a spiritual program of living based on the 12 steps. And it's also kind of a trapdoor at step 11. I don't know. I hope that. Do you think that translates for people?
I think it's a wonderful description, and I think it's just scratching the surface of really the depth and the breadth of the work. And I just want to acknowledge, I mentioned when I introduced you that you're a scholar and that you're a minister, among other things. However, you're also, you have your Doctor of Ministry from the Claremont School of Theology, and you're an ordained minister, in addition to your other accomplishments. So you have studied and lived and learned what you teach.
I have. I absolutely have, and I've studied it at a deep level. I spent a couple of semesters at Claremont working on independent study, looking at the origins of AA, the Oxford group, some of these groups that went into, developing the developmental model, the organizational model, which kind of became the 12 traditions. I mean, there are a lot of things to look at in the 12-step model, but I would say the first, I will just disclose, I've been sober for over 30 years, and I don't feel old enough at all for that to be the case, but it just happens to be. So anyway, but the thing is, for my first, really, I would say 20 years of sobriety, I was a voracious seeker of healing and understanding at the deep level of the spiritual. So I was doing many body, mind, spirit modalities that appear in the book and exploring those at a deep level. So I understood that, and I really worked very extensively with others in the program, which is suggested in the 12-step, et cetera. But it wasn't until I went to Claremont and began to study some texts, and honestly, I knew about the Jesus of my childhood religion, and, I had, great sweet feelings, but very little information, really. And at Claremont, we had the unbelievable honor, actually, of having the Center for Antiquity and Religion on the campus, and the scholars who were part of discovering and translating both the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Scrolls were faculty members at Claremont. So I was taught by the man who unrolled the scroll of the Psalms from the Dead Sea Scroll and translated it. It was one removed from finding this scroll that was 3,000 years old. So I began to really learn about these ancient texts that very interestingly disappeared. They were shoved aside when Constantine came in to make Christianity the exact opposite of what Jesus taught, which is such a very strange thing. But he said, no, we're making this the official religion of the Roman Empire. And if you remember, and many people do or don't, but Jesus was killed by the Roman Empire because he was against what they were doing in terms of oppressing people. So it was just like, a crazy thing. And they said, get rid of all these texts that really show the more intricate and subtle spiritual path of the teachings of this guy Jesus, because he's a revolutionary, he's a radical. So they were hidden away, and within the same 3 or 4 year period, both the Nag Hammadi Scrolls and the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. The Nag Hammadi scrolls are sometimes called the Gnostic Gospels, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners have heard of those. Elaine Pagels from Princeton famously really unpacked those and has done a lot of work on them in translation and teaching, etc. Anyway, in the Gnostic Gospels, I suddenly encountered this process-oriented Afro-Asiatic, Near Eastern Jewish teacher who never heard about Christianity, Jesus of Nazareth, teaching the process that I was also discovering in the 12 steps. So in other words, teaching, ask and it shall be given unto you, but then he who asks, needs to continue on the path, and when you continue on the path, you're going to encounter obstacles and darkness. That's not in the Matthew translation at all. That ended up in the Bible. So this Jesus of the Nag Hammadi scrolls suddenly leapt out at me, and I thought, wait a minute. This 12-step path is the Jesus path, the lived path. It always used to really bother me that, Buddhism and Shinto, a lot of these paths of world religions, and I studied comparative religion at Claremont, a lot of these paths have a path. Confucianism, the I Ching, all of these things have a path. Christianity, doctrinaire Christianity or Constantinian Christianity doesn't really have a path. They say, you're saved and then you go to church and you do various things. There's a belief system, but it's not an internal path of deep spiritual growth. It just wasn't present in that form of Christianity. Now, in Eastern Christianity, under Origen and Eastern Orthodoxy, there's much more of a mystical tradition. But really, in Western Christianity, it wasn't commonly present. And we learned a lot of rules of churches, whatever church you went to, whether it was Catholic or Presbyterian or whatever it was, you learned the rules of that doctrine. But those were made up by people. So suddenly, experiencing these original texts and hearing the words of, it says these are the words of Jesus. And hearing this guy who talks about the fact that, there's an internal journey that is not the easiest of paths, but once he ends this particular quote from the book of Thomas, he ends this quote with saying that once you commit to going on that path and going deep on that path, you will rule over all. Now that's pretty deep. And what he's referring to there, of course, is that you will rule over your own internal naysayers, over all of these internal oppositions that really get us, right? And that you will have self-mastery very much in the form of these Eastern teachers. Well, he was an Eastern teacher. When I learned at Claremont, and these are a lot of, Eurocentric white professors, I had at least, and I learned, you could have blown me over with a feather when they said Jesus never heard of Christianity, and he was an Afro-Asiatic, Near Eastern Jew. Now, maybe I expected some fringe person to be telling me something like this, but this, erudite professor who unrolled the scroll of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that was just the beginning of the learning. So I began to really look into what the correlations were between and among these different depth systems. And so I see a great correlation between the lived, walked path, as I describe it in the Gateways, actually, and a lived Jesus path, not Christianity, the Jesus path, very different. And actually, Howard Thurman, a wonderful, brilliant American theologian, said, and people quote him as though he's, just one rung, adjacent to God. And Christians quote him, and yet their theology doesn't support what he said at all. But he said, don't call me a Christian. I am a follower of the teachings of Jesus. Well, me too. And it turns out the teachings of Jesus are extremely universal, and they mirror the teachings of Buddha, the teachings of Islam, so the deep teachings of the depth paths. So yes, so I began to learn all this at Claremont, and I just knew too much for my own good. So I tried to start explaining this stuff. It's an awful lot to unpack for people, especially as a minister, as an ordained minister. Here's some of the cynicism of the academy. We were told, as people preparing for ministry, all of this stuff about these scrolls. We saw the scrolls. We touched the scrolls. I mean, it was an amazing experience. Learning about the origins of the First Testament. Just so much to talk about in all of this. And then some of our lovely, brilliant professors who taught us all these ideas said, so now that you know this, we have to encourage you not to try to explain this to your congregations. This will threaten their basic mythic structure, and most people really don't want to learn this stuff in church unless you have an extremely bright congregation. So I immediately was like, are you kidding me? What are they saying here? I began to understand it after going into pastoral ministry, and basically, you're trying to make a monthly nut, you're trying to get the music department working with you're trying to keep a business together, frankly. And so to teach these concepts, which are mind-blowing in many ways and really counter to a lot of the formal theology that the churches are teaching, is a challenge. So, I have struggled with that, frankly, over the years, and I served in pastoral ministry for 15 years straight through. And then I took a break to write this book, and I realized I really feel that my best role is to help people to ask these deeper questions and then apply them to their own faith walk. My wonderful professor of Old Testament, Dr. Sanders, used to say, holding his hands like a Libra scale, he used to say, the challenge is to read the Bible, and I would say beyond the Bible, is to work these ancient wisdom teachings both critically and faithfully. So you get more education, and then you have to figure out, okay, so I have this critical lens. I understand those socio-political times that really impacted how these things got hidden or included or not included, more to the point, in a lot of Western theology. And that would lead me to say, well, so this is all a big lie. But then I see that people really have poured their devotion into a faith walk that's based on whatever the Western theology has created through systematic theology. So trying to walk that walk of teaching both critically and faithfully has been a challenge for me, because I will go back to the beginning of this conversation. I am a teacher. So if I know something that's going to open an idea for you, it kills me to not tell you to at least look into it. So I think, teaching and opening these ideas through the gateways is going to give not only me, but anybody who, is able to use the book, use it as a teaching tool, use it as a self-learning tool, really a great template for understanding, wait a minute, there are so many different ways to open ourselves internally to the wisdom and majesty of the universe. And I think that is what this path that the Gateways opens us onto has the potential to do.
And the beauty about the book and everything that you just explained is that that's just the beginning of the book. The first half of the book, let's say, that explains that in more than you can do in an interview format, the depth and breadth of the teachings. However, the second part of the book is, if we can organize it that way, are the actual gateways, the actual 12 gateways that you have developed, which is the spiritual path, or the spiritual deepening. Can you speak a little bit about the gateways? What is a gateway? How is one organized, and how are they used in support of addiction recovery? Or I will say, whether or not you're have an addiction to anything or not, and some people argue we all have addictions, but I will say as a minister myself that it's a beautiful unfolding of a spiritual path for anyone. regardless if they have an addiction
I would
or
agree
not.
with that. And I have, really my field of ministry is in interspirituality at this point. And I have tried to lead a couple communities which were based on interspirituality, meaning teaching the wisdom tradition of the world's traditions. And, there was kind of no there. I mean, people said, well, okay, what is this about? What is the bottom line? So in a sense, this book was designed to create practices and rituals and an understanding of how to live an interspiritual wisdom path in community or individually. So it was trying to answer, it was kind of writing my own theology because and remember, I started this, I started putting this on paper by drawing pictures. And I still have that notebook where all those pictures are, so all those drawings are. So I saw this very visually, but I saw this, in academia they talk about theory and praxis, Praxis, but basically that means practice. So you look at the theory of a thing, you understand the background, and then how do you put it into practice? So that's how I see the two halves of the book. The first half is exploring the history and the context and some of the deeper concepts inherent in the different steps. And then the second half of the book, which is the gateways, goes back to my original template, which was visual, and shows the praxis. So in other words, you can open up the book to Gateway Essence 1 through 12 and say, okay, I'm working on this principle. I'm working on wisdom, transcendence, universality, for instance. That's in number 7. And I have some issues around, what am I feeling here? Maybe around the pituitary gland, et cetera. So it locates, so I create a kind of, I had this idea of creating a bento box. I love Japanese food, but I also love the idea, I thought a bento box of spiritual tools. So with each gateway essence, it's really the praxis of the theory of the first part of the book. So here's how you do this, as opposed to here's how you just think about this. So I correlate each one of the gateways with one of the steps. And so I just mentioned step 7, so that's humbly ask God to remove these defects of character, for instance. And then I correlate it with a chakra. So this particular chakra is located at the forehead or the third eye, which is where the pituitary gland is also located. And so a person might be having some issues with hormone regulation, et cetera, or a certain level of emotion, and may really utilize some of the tools that I offer. So on the opening page of this 7th essence, if you will, 7th gateway essence. So, all right, so we look at the chakra. The function is, as I said, for this particular one, wisdom, transcendence, universality. This is what we're getting to when we get to that level of the body and the subtle body, because a lot of this works in the etheric body, which is not readily available visually. And the location on the body is the forehead or the third eye. And then each chakra, of course, goes along with a geometric shape. And I love sacred geometry. I think it gives depth and perspective to all of these ideas and concepts. So the sacred geometrical shape for that particular gateway is a circle. Color is indigo, and then there are musical notes involved with this. So think about this. It's very practical. So you're having this hormone regulation issue, and you're feeling maybe lightheaded, or you're feeling some sort of thing. And plus, you're trying to let go of some of these defects of character. That's what this step says. Okay, wait. So how do we use this? Well, A and B flat are the musical notes. So maybe you get a beautiful some kind of musical instrument, and you play those two musical notes. And you play them, and they then resonate with and activate that particular level of consciousness and soothe and heal. Then there are gemstones that go along with each level. So for this particular one, the 7th, lapis lazuli, moonstone, and silver all go along with that level. I did a lot of research on what these all were, by the way, to see really what the mystical teachers teach really correlates with that particular level, especially that particular chakra. You may want to put a lapis lazuli in a glass of water, put it on the windowsill, leave it there in the sunshine for 6 hours, and then drink it. You'll be drinking a deep property of that lapis lazuli, and these are all practices I learned over the years of my own healing, etc. And it shows, again, as I said, the pituitary gland is engaged with that. Then, after I do this kind of bento box, showing you all of the different particular things you could address through just working that particular gateway, I talk about a ritual, a way that you can really practice this in a ritual format. So this particular one has to do with letting go of a lot of stuff. It has to do with letting go of what the 12 steps called the defects of character, but letting go of grief, letting go of departed loved ones, etc. So I then give some pretty in-depth descriptions of ways you can set up a ritual altar. In this case, I think I talk about Dia de los Muertos in this particular one, which is such a wonderful holiday that originated in Mexico, but that really brings the essence and the celebration of the departed ancestors right into the home every year on what's also known in the Catholic Church as All Saints' Day. So I talk about how to use that essence. Each one of these really has to do with stabilizing something energetic at that level of growth. And, we don't grow in just one direction, of course. I know you know this. So sometimes, sometimes in the AA program, people say, what step are you working? And, usually you can stop and say, you know what, I'm really at step 3, which is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand God. I'm really having some surrender issues or some control issues. So you can pretty much identify, once you use these steps as a backbone or a kind of an understanding for how you work your own spiritual path, what step you're on. And so you can go right to that particular step and say, you know what, I'm not feeling good today. I'm not feeling good at this level. I feel that I have a whole lot of work to do. I have a headache. I feel like my hormone balance is off. And then you can work a lot of these tools. So that's how the gateways work, and they all have a color. They have beautiful illustrations showing you what the different resonances are at that particular level. So think about this. A tuning fork. I mean, I come from a musical background. My whole family is full of professional musicians, and we always had a tuning fork around. But we also always had a piano, and, periodically it got out of tune. And so we had the piano tuner come, and what a difference it made. Just a slightly flat note or a slightly out of harmony sound, resonates at deep levels of our being. So these really are about getting in tune. The gateways are about a practiced way of working this spiritual program. So really the two halves of the book are really two halves of a shell, or two halves of a whole. The first part is the theory in a way and background, and it's fun and interesting because I talk about the origins of a lot of the traditions in the program, but also the cultural situation that led into so many people but got flooding into AA in the late 60s or mid-70s, starting in the 1950s with advertising. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in the first half. And then we go into, okay, how do we work this? And so the working is from a body, mind, spirit, holistic, strength-based perspective. So as you're working this step where you want to let go of some stuff, how do you also affirm your inherent strength and your inherent balance? For instance, in this situation, if you're saying my hormones feel out of balance, and really everything is hormones, by the way. It's not just, so a lot of times when we have a headache, there's something off with one of our hormones or with our diet, et cetera. So these are really about going in there and recalibrating and retuning ourselves. So that's kind of what the gateways in essence are, and each one provides a ritual. I also show in the back of the book putting together a 12-week model for a community utilizing the 12 steps as the basis for a community meeting that really focuses on the spiritual concept. So, and then at the very back of the book, I then create, which was so fun to create, an interspiritual, holistic bento box of tools. And these are body, mind, spirit tools, everything from, really looking at what yoga posture correlates with the root chakra, what essential oil correlates with that, everything from that to different musical notes and chants and practices. And then I really go into a big, interesting, very easy to penetrate and understand description of the different kinds of spiritual paths. So you can look at the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. You can look at the Hindu Four Ways to God, the 10 words or 10 commandments of the Torah, the Jesus path, and you can say, oh, wow, that goes with this and this goes with that. And then we get into some of the concepts of the multidimensional tools toward the very end, where I really present, some of the diagrams about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the meridians and how these things all correlate together. This is a very rich text, and it's a wonderful reference. I really see this as a reference text as we move into this spiritual but not religious age. People are looking for a way to create a system for actually living this thing. And I really believe in the inherent creativity and potential of people, and especially people. There's a phrase in AA I've always loved. They say alcoholics are just like everybody else, only a little more so. And the thing that I love about that is that that's where the magic lies. It's that a little more so part. That's what gets us in trouble in a society that wants you to walk up the right side of the hallway and down the left side, because creative thinkers frequently have, been diagnosed with something like ADD or something, as opposed to saying, wait a minute, I have a little more so. I have a little different capacity to see a larger whole. If that's penalized or if that's turned into a shame-based kind of situation, people just feel bad about themselves for their unique way of looking at the world, rather than saying, wow, I have a big contribution to make to the world, and I just need to expand the context in which I make my contribution a little bit more. So, yes, we do some things when we're actively addicted that we really need to get right about. I mean, we often end up finding ourselves in situations we never would ever have imagined being in. But these are not bad people getting good in AA and any of the 12-step programs. These are people who have woundings and who have deep creativity, whose strengths have not fit into the general mode. And so to really pull forth their strengths and then give strengthening spiritual body, mind, spirit tools to them, to us, to the world, hopefully, to really strengthen that etheric body and that spiritual spine, if you will. Wow, what a great healing tool. And not just for people who become addicted. People who have, we used to talk about Asperger's syndrome like it was this. Well, first of all, it's this kind of a strange name. The doctor, they named it after, so it just doesn't sound like something you want to have. But when you really begin looking into it and this whole autism spectrum, et cetera, what you begin to learn is, wait a minute, these are highly creative people. Albert Einstein was considered to be on this spectrum, et cetera. We look at extra creative thinking and say, okay, rather than having to medicate yourself to just be in the world, how do we strengthen your inherent brilliance so that you don't have to medicate yourself to be in the world? And in fact, you can share your brilliance with the world in a way that may just transform culture, society, and the potential of future generations.
You know, I'm so glad, Jane, that you hit on the topic of strength-based recovery, because I do believe that that's really the key, and that's part of the beauty of the gateways. And as everyone can see, it is absolutely all-inclusive, interspiritual, interfaith, multicultural. You know, it embraces everyone and every wisdom-based teachings, and you bring it all together. And there's so much to share. And so I want to let everyone know that don't, first of all, look for the Gateways, the Wisdom of 12 Steps Spirituality book by Reverend Dr. Jane Galloway. But also, really great news, I'll give you a sneak peek, is Jane is going to start airing her podcast called The Gateways on Sacred Stories podcast stream also. And so you will all have a great opportunity to really dig in each week with Dr. Jane, as she'll be going into depth on more of the wisdom teachings, and then also on each of the gateways individually to really bring them to life. Jane, just final words. Can you just share with the audience, please, what you hope resonates most with the readers of the gateways?
You know, I've got to say one thing about that, which has to do with the fact that I'm a woman in recovery. And, you know, I was fortunate because my father, as I said, was in AA. And honestly, I didn't know what was wrong with me. I mean, I knew I couldn't stop drinking, but I thought I was crazy or something. I was so relieved when somebody suggested I go to AA. I was like, hey, I love AA. So, but many people don't have that reaction to it. I grew up with a very positive view of the program. My father was funny and brilliant and silly and taught me so much, and I watched AA transform his life. But many, many people come into AA with a shame-based feeling about, you know, having had to end up there. The other thing is that there is nothing cool about being a woman drunk. And there just really isn't. We have mythology about being, you know, the football player and everybody's out there getting drunk when the game happens. We have none of that stuff for women, right? So women are doing a double and triple time to manage their addiction, to manage their image in society, to manage their multiple roles as parents, as children, as a whole deal. And it is tough to then come into a program that was written by men for men. Really it was. I mean, it was written in an age when everything was always about he, and it was mostly men. I mean, there was one woman who was part of the early AA group. So a lot of the perspective, a lot of what I hope people understand from this is that most women I know don't ever need to hear one more punitive word again. So whatever the system is that may work for guys out on the football field, I don't know, you know, kind of a put-down sort of culture that can motivate. It motivates men much more than women, is not part of anything that helped me recover. As a matter of fact, I have spent so many years recovering from different layers of trauma in my life that the last thing that was going to help me recover, I mean, was to be in that system of, first of all, be like a man. So this is a feeling-based and multi-leveled system of recovery, and it is the opposite of shame-based. There is appropriate shame, and we deal with this in the fourth and fifth step, and we deal with stuff we don't want to repeat. But this is a system that pulls forth the experience of the woman, of all people. I know numerous men who have read this book and not be able to put it down. So it's not a book for women, but it is a book that comes from the female voice. And if you look at the field, I would say most, if not all, of the writing about the 12 steps and about addiction comes from men who are interpreting. And this is what's happened in theology over the millennia, too. Men interpreting God and men well, you know what? It doesn't always work for women. So this is a uniquely female voice. So in other words, the lens through which I'm seeing, or the lens through which I'm taking you on this journey, is my lens, and I'm a woman. And I've had all of the different layers of experience that many, if not most, women have. You know, brokenheartedness and extreme elation and all the stuff that we go through. Heartbroken from kids, adore kids, the whole deal. It's a different experience. And also the cultural experience of really developing esteem as a sober person and not having to do it like a guy, you know, doing it with all of the nuance of the beauty of being a woman and bringing forth the goddess energy. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that I really want to draw people back to the brilliance and the channeling of the founders, and they were channelers too. Look, these two guys were highly flawed, and they knew it. But they channeled things, and I'm going to read it again. To us, the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. These guys wrote this. They channeled it. I want to draw people back to that deep universal opening into our experience of spirit. And the thing I've always felt, even though I've been ordained and served in very traditional settings and less traditional settings, I trust God to do the work. I just want to help people get on a path to get to wherever they access whatever that is. And, of course, God is a made-up word. I mean, we just, you know, people made that word up. So spirit, life force, the animating force of the universe, I trust that force. If we move 50% toward it to just grab us, envelop us in its love and transformation, and take us on the journey of a lifetime, or not just one lifetime. So really, it's about that inherently female voice coming through me, again, not just for women. These books by men aren't just for men. Women read them and try to apply their experience. But this is an inherently female perspective on the depth experience of the 12 steps. And secondly, I have great reverence for this channeled tradition, and I want to lead people back to the origins of these 12 steps and not to all of the very strange, in certain ways, folklore that has come to be substituted for, or in some ways thought of as what the program really is. It has nothing to do with it. All of these rules and regulations, and they're just not in the literature. They're not in the literature. They're not in the practice of the program. So I want this to be an opening into a universal experience of active engagement with the power that runs the universe. Do you think that's too dramatic? Do you think that's too big a goal?
Absolutely not. I'm all in.
Good.
I think that it is a much needed and very necessary goal. So without a doubt. And I encourage everyone listening, and tell all your friends to take the journey. Take the journey with Reverend Dr. Jane Galloway with the Gateways, the Wisdom of 12-Step Spirituality. Again, it's for men and women. It's a strength-based recovery system for people struggling with addiction, but I will also say that it is also a beautiful spiritual path for those struggling with addiction and those who are not. It is being published by Sacred Stories Publishing. The release date is September 27th, which it just happens to be my birthday. This is my birthday gift to myself. I'll just share that. I will share that, absolutely. Also, Dr. Jane will soon be airing her podcast, The Gateways, on Sacred Stories podcast stream, so stay tuned for that. Dr. Galloway, Jane, thank you so very much for being with me today on Sacred Stories.
Well, Reverend Patricia, thank you so very much. This has been a wonderful experience today, but it's also been a wonderful experience working with you as the publisher of this work. You understand it. You've asked me important questions about how it focuses and where it goes, and this is exactly how something becomes a living system. So seriously, I am so grateful to you for challenging me and asking me these kinds of questions, because I can feel the system starting to breathe through this kind of engagement. So thank you, and it's been fun talking, and I look forward to getting more in-depth with some of these concepts on the podcast.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is. We're with the gateways. It is time to bring the gateways to life. So Sacred Stories listeners, let's do that together. Thank you for joining us today. Remember to share, like, comment on the podcast, tell everyone about Sacred Stories and the beautifully wonderful conscious conversations that we have here.